Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and this podcast. And I am so excited. I've been doing this now for 18 months. And it's mind-blowing. Everybody who I've met and chatted with over the last 18 months. And I'm excited to introduce you today to my guest, who I met at an inclusion conference in New Orleans a couple of years ago, chatting about both what we do. And before we get started on that, happy pre-Thanksgiving. So we'll talk a little bit about Thanksgiving, what's on everybody's menu in a little bit. But let me introduce you and let's get started with this conversation because I think it's really intriguing. Becky Kekula, I just said your first name wrong. Becky Kekula is an international TedX motivational speaker and advocate for inclusion. She serves as a disability Equality Index Director at Disability In, and that's who she was representing when I saw her at this trade show. So welcome to the show. Becky, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And we talked about this, just having a conversation way back then. So I'm glad that we finally made this happen. And congratulations on becoming a new mom.
Thank you.
That's so super excited. And everybody, she just moved. So grandma is close by to hang out and watch her grandson grow. So that's exciting too. So before we jump in and explain what Disability In is, as well as what the Disability Equality Index is.
Disability In is a global nonprofit organization that assists corporations along the scope of Fortune 1000 companies with their disability inclusion journey, with the ultimate goal of reducing the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. So really helping these corporations build out the infrastructure to be more inclusive and welcoming of people with disabilities. Firstly, as employees who can then help create a safe environment and welcoming environment for consumers.
Oh, that's awesome. And then the index does what?
And the index is a benchmarking tool. It's a self-assessment that companies take to measure how they're doing when it comes to disability inclusion and advancing all areas of their organization, trying to incorporate disability in all that they do.
Well, and that's amazing because there's so many. And I know you probably know the number of people with disabilities in the United States, but it's a large amount of people in the U.S. and it's not necessarily physical disabilities that we can see. In your situation, you are a little person, and then you have people who utilize wheelchairs. But as hearing aids get smaller and smaller, you might not know somebody is deaf or their vision is bad or whatever other disability they might have that's invisible, including food allergies.
Exactly. And I do have hearing loss in my right ear, and I barely talk about it because I rely so much on my left ear, but I forget that is another disability per se. I focus on advocating on behalf of physical disabilities because it's what people can see. But one of the biggest challenges I think as a society we face is everyone views people with physical disabilities as a scary experience, and they don't want to bring their whole selves and share this disability that they may have that you can't see,
right,
until they're in a space where they feel 100% safe to do so.
And I think in one of the articles or the videos that I've watched of you is ask me any question. I'm here to answer your questions and you say that because, and like you just said, is people are scared because they don't know.
Exactly. That's a lot of It's fear of the unknown. It's not really being able to put your finger on the pulse on what is it that makes you fearful. You're not coming up with good enough reasons because you haven't asked the right questions.
And people are like, oh my God, I can't live without gluten. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, this woman's, I'm not eating that muffin. I'm like, why not? She's, because I eat gluten. I'm like, oh my God, seriously? And you being a little person, people are like, I'm sure you got this. How do you get around being so small? Or I get around, right?
I figure out a way.
You do.
But putting the finger on the pulse more to the topic at hand, and I'll just bring it up now. When I was younger, even doctors didn't necessarily know how to address my short stature. I had a general pediatrician who I would go to yearly, sometimes twice a year, just depending on what was needed. And then I had a specialist who knew all about dwarfism. And the specialist I started meeting when I was 6 months old, and they were the subject matter expert. And they would constantly tell me that I needed to lose weight and watch what I eat. And then the doctor, who's my pediatrician, would tell me that I need to eat more cheese, I need to gain weight, because he was judging my weight off of people my age and not thinking about the height difference. And at this point in time, there weren't charts related to achondroplasia, which is my type of dwarfism, which doctors have more access to now just because of technology. This was back in the 80s. And so I was getting these mixed messaging where the doctor who was the specialist said, you need to watch your weight. And my parents were trying to help me stay really focused on that. So just naturally growing up, and even as an adult, I'm not a big dessert person because I was constantly hearing Dr. Kopitz, which was the doctor's name. Dr. Kopitz, watch what you eat. But one of my biggest struggles is portions. So I may not eat dessert, but then the portions, I'm still just as hungry as the person next to me. And that's always been a challenge. And my mom grew up in an Italian family where they had 8-course meals every Sunday. And just there was never a lesson of nutrition. So then I also attached myself to not being a big red meat eater, and I cut that out. But still, it's the portions that I continue to struggle with. So I would say just getting around, it would always be helpful for me to be a few pounds less, but I enjoy food too much.
So is there, because I would never have thought this either, but just saying what you had, is there a different nutritional base or portion sizes that you should be following? Because I would never have actually ever considered that either.
Yeah, I think ideally we're eating, since we are the size of a child, we should probably be eating closer to the portions of what a child eats. But it just, it doesn't align too well.
No. And if you're going to a business meeting, you're going to be fed as here's not the kiddie plate, right?
Yeah.
Not intended. But yeah, you would be served that full portion size, which sometimes is way too much food in general for anybody.
Right.
For the average person. So how did you get started in doing this? You grew up with dwarfism, and is this what you wanted to do as you grew up?
I think I was just narrowly focused on traditional career path that those around me were interested in. So I was that typical child who wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. But once I realized how much schooling you had to go to, I wasn't really thrilled about that plan.
Yeah.
And then I grew really attracted to the field of marketing. I just thought it was fascinating, just being able to brand yourself and market yourself. And it helps you with other life skills. And thought early on in high school that I did want to contribute back to the world and share my story through public speaking. I had written in my junior essay that was used to apply to colleges that someday I'd want to be a part-time motivational speaker, because I didn't think that I wanted it to be my full time, because I still wanted to be part of a larger team. And I know everyone says like you can build that team, but like I liked having it complement the work that I do. So it wasn't always that they both complemented each other so well. But then I kind of just started to learn about disability inclusion through just different networks and people that I worked with. I started out in marketing, really interested in just working at an ad agency. But then I was asked to work at this ad agency as an intern that was an intermediary between the entertainment companies and the general public, filling advanced screenings and helping promote releases of screenings. And I kind of at that moment realized this entertainment industry has a lot of influence. It probably influences how people like me are treated in society based on what people have seen in the past. So I started getting more interested in taking more opportunities, not always specifically related to marketing during the internship stage, but then as I was graduating college, I faced a lot of challenges trying to get my first job, but I ended up in the entertainment marketing department at a major agency. And that's when I started to learn even more. This is a well-oiled machine. I'm going to learn as much as possible about this industry and figure out how I can be part of the change. But I was going to work really hard at first and not really talk about my agenda because I wanted to be respected as a hard worker and a good team player and contributor. But once people started asking me a few years down the line what I was passionate about, I was able to start voicing that and really find a way to align my life passion with just trying to change even the experience of new parents when they find out their child has a disability and what's possible for them in the future, and being an example. And now being a mom of someone with dwarfism, I think I have a bigger fire under my butt to just really continue to make that change so he has an easier time when entering the workforce and the world in general.
That's awesome, because there's so many different things that we think about when we're trying to enter the workforce, and having a disability adds an extra level of anxiety to that.
Of course.
And having individuals like you who are there motivating and saying, hey, this is doable. Here's some, I think that's just a great asset to have and to be able to provide as well. But there's so much anxiety in trying to find a job in the first place. And I think somewhere you wrote that you applied to 1,000 jobs.
So this was after I had several internship experiences. Internships are a lot easier to get. But when it came to full-time employment, I ended up sending out 1,000 resumes, went on 100 interviews over the course of 4 months, sometimes up to 4 interviews a day. And then once I was tired from that experience, but kept applying, I stumbled upon some temporary placement staffing agencies specific to the entertainment industry. And they were able to go send me to go work somewhere without interviewing. And then I was able to start working, improve myself. And finally, after the third temporary assignment, I was there for 7 months when they still were going to string me along. And I said, I'm going to have to go if you don't make me a permanent employee. And luckily they did hire me on full time. And I ended up being there for 5 years because I was so fearful of taking that next step. I was recruited after that to work at a television studio in casting to really help change how people with disabilities are included in TV shows. And I did that for about a year and then made a shift, moved back. I was on the West Coast for all of that experience. And then I moved back to the East Coast where I'm from to launch public speaking and really focus more on my life mission of working in diversity and disability inclusion.
Oh, that's awesome. Let's jump to combining what you do with what I do in eating. And I know that at the conference that we were at, there were a couple of box lunch tables on one of the meal functions. One of the other things that I noticed quite prevalently when we walked, and I don't know if you went into the general session room, but it was so packed, you could barely get through the tables. I'm like, this is not accessible. We're at a conference on inclusion, and the accessibility access points were non-existent. But let's just talk about the food. And I was intrigued to chat with you about that because our tables are a certain height, and buffet, when you do setups, there's high buffets, etc. So can you talk to us about what an inclusive dining experience is for you?
Yeah, I think buffets are really hard for our community. First off, we shouldn't be helping ourselves to portions because that's a big challenge that we face when it comes to figuring out what portion. Everything looks great and you want to just eat everything. And the other thing is, in most cases, buffets are way too high for us to reach. So if I'm going to an event, I prefer a plated meal, and I do prefer to avoid red meat. So I may go the vegetarian or pescatarian route when it comes to signing up for a meeting in advance. But when it comes to giant crowds, it's inevitable. I'm going to need someone to help me. So what I try to promote is if anyone sees someone like me at an event, try to offer to help them. They may not take you up on that offer because we are stubborn people and we want to try ourselves first. But when you see us about to pull a plate down that may end up hitting the floor, you may want to intervene. But I would say create that inclusive dialogue that you're there willing to help someone if they need it. And it'll make the experience much better because sometimes it may be a cost thing. An event may only have a buffet as an option because that's what they asked for. We do have the Little People of America conferences that happen every summer, and we are able to negotiate with the hotel to have a lower setup. So if buffet is the only option, you can have a lower setup so we can all reach what we're looking for. And maybe it's sometimes in order for people to streamline, they'll have the same meal options on one side of the table as the other side of the table. So maybe one side lower and one side's higher so more people can access. And then because we're eating less, or we should be eating less, sometimes if you're hosting an event where it's a la carte, there may be an option to reduce the price just because it's like ordering a kid's meal. Luckily, we haven't been questioned when asking for a kid's meal in most places.
That's really interesting. And I like the idea of the double-sided the buffets and one being lower than the other. And there was an episode I did with Elisa Hayes, and she's in a wheelchair, utilizes a wheelchair, I'm sorry. And her accessing some of the things, utilizing that wheelchair is hard for her. And not having an attendant there to help with that is a challenge. And reaching for things as well, for you as well as somebody in a wheelchair, reaching for something over on the other side of the buffet or a ladle that's really high, that's impossible.
Right. Exactly.
And kind of just thinking about how to do that. And I even have suggested, hey, if you've got a vertical buffet, make sure that the things that are on the top shelf are also on the bottom shelf.
Exactly.
And just to balance it out so that the average size person and someone short in stature can reach them. Now, what about seating wise? Because all chairs in buffet and hotel ballrooms are the same size. Do we need to think about that aspect, the design aspect of our food functions?
Another thing we're stubborn about is we don't want someone to have to make a huge alteration. We don't want people to be resentful of the accommodations we may need or request. But I think it would be helpful to have a step stool on hand if we needed to use it for the buffet or for sitting at our table.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when I'm at an event, especially at a hotel, most times when I get on the chair, my legs just go straight out. So even if I had a step stool, it would probably have to be pretty high in order for it to be helpful.
Okay.
But it may be helpful to have it for me to get up on the chair.
That makes sense.
It just depends on if it's going to be like an all-week event. But if it's a one-time meal, maybe we'd be okay with that. I think it really depends. But what's important is when you're setting up the meeting and the event, however people sign up to attend, however you collect RSVPs, just put a line in there. Do you need an accommodation for this event? And maybe even be honest about what the setup's going to be like so they can let you know if they need a different accommodation.
Yeah, the way I teach it is we want everyone to fully participate in this event. Please let us know below if you have any assistance that we can provide you. And I have, the way I teach it again is mobility, seeing, hearing, or vision and hearing, and food allergies, and then other. And with that being able to fill in the box, because I do think it's important. And I think individuals, and this comes with food allergy people as well, as we don't want to be a burden.
Right.
So we don't want to tell people in advance, but in a sense, not telling us in advance is actually even a more of a burden because we're trying to figure it out at the last minute.
Yeah. And one of the more obvious pieces of advice that I could probably give is if you have someone who's blind or low vision at your table, once they sit down with their food, most likely you may be the person that you also assisted them with the food. Give them, and even ahead of time, give them a layout, a visual layout of what the table looks like.
Mhm.
If there's water to the left or the right, just so they don't then embarrass themselves if they knock something over without realizing where it is. Give as much information as you can to allow that person to fully participate.
Well, and I think that's for anybody who answers that question, right? You can actually direct information directly to them. You don't have to, you could put it out there, but if you're trying to keep some of it hush because it's a secret ballroom design or whatever, but be purposeful in why you're putting it out there and to whom you're putting it out there if they need to know. Yeah. The one, and I've said this before in other episodes and in my teachings, is that this woman I met who used to work at the Hotel Del in San Diego, she said, when you put a ramp out for an individual who needs the ramp to get out to the beach, are you actually utilizing that ramp? Are you really calling them out even more so by putting that ramp for only them to use? Why not design the entrance to that beach party so that everybody can use it?
Yeah.
And that's not a call out. That's not accentuating their disability.
And there's a great universal design comic out there where it shows a big snowstorm happening and someone shoveling the stairs, and a wheelchair user comes up to the scene and asks if they can shovel the ramp. And they respond by saying, we'll do it after we do the stairs. But if they shoveled the ramp first, everyone could access the building and the stairs could come later.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I bet once that ramp's built, so many more people will use it.
Yeah.
Like mothers who have strollers, older people who may need to have less of an incline.
Right. Oh, that's a really good point. And or people with suitcases or scooters or whatever. Yeah.
Headquarters once, and there was a line where it said, even if you're coming back from the grocery store and your hands are full from multiple bags and you're struggling to open your front door, it's technically a temporary disability because your hands are tied and you need assistance, or you have to make an alteration, drop one of the bags. And it's thinking about those things that we all need help at different points in time, regardless of whether or not you have a disability.
And Samantha Evans just commented on that illustration. The guy shoveling the stairs, but the wheelchair user says everyone can get in the building. Yeah. And so another phrase that I've started to use, if you design for the minority, you welcome the majority.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a great way to think about your menu planning. It's a great way to think about the entrances to your events and your design. Now, one thing that I want to bring up, you and I were talking just before we got on about high school, and it could potentially take you longer to get somewhere walking. Mm-hmm. And I think let's talk about that too, is like the access points to our events and how long of a walk it is. And which then reminds me really quickly of this gentleman. I planned a scavenger hunt around Epcot years ago. And one of the gentlemen came up to me way after the event the next day. And I really wish I'd known that we were going to be walking 5 miles around Epcot all day. And I'm like, why? And he's, I have the pain medicine on my hip that drips, and I would have changed that. He's a former NFL football player he's like, I need to manage that. So even somebody, I'm sure, with any kind of other things like that, it needs to be known in advance, and we need to communicate that.
Absolutely. And it's really important to make sure that people have the access they can get. And most places may have a handicap parking area, so you want to scope that out. People may look at someone with dwarfism and think, oh, you don't have a disability if you don't have any additional mobility devices or whatever it may be. But it's really important for us to be able to park at a handicap space because we're more likely to get hit by a car if we have to park really far away from the venue where we're going. And
Wow.
it does take us longer to get to the main entrance, wherever it may be. So it's very important to have that access. And another thing is it's challenging for us to utilize valet because we have pedal extensions on our cars. So again, having that handicap space option is a lot more helpful because we can independently get to the spot and get to the building safely.
Okay, so let's talk about like shuttles that we take. We're at a hotel or a convention center, and then there's an offsite party at a beach or wherever. Transportation, because it's typically buses. So would we need to rent that I want to say the handicap bus, and I know we utilize that. I worked for the Paralympics in Vancouver a year ago. So we did have to rent a different bus for those individuals using wheelchairs. So is a standard bus okay? Or
I think it would be important to lay it out there, the whole timeline of the event, and make sure you have multiple touch points. Would you need an accommodation for this part of the event? Would you need an accommodation for this? But for me specifically, I would just request, can the van have a step stool in it so I can easily get up into the van?
Right.
But if there was someone who was a wheelchair user attending the event, they would ask for a different accommodation, and you may need to get one of those accessible ramps. Or maybe they'll let you know, we prefer just to use our own vehicle to and from. So maybe you can help reserve parking at that venue where we're going.
That's a really good point too. Yeah, because you don't want to have to rent another 55 passenger bus just for one person. Right.
And yeah, we don't maybe have that be a phone call of can we check out the options.
I think phone calls are really important, Becky. They can answer so many questions.
So I think sometimes people are quick to respond to an accommodation request, especially if they've never had to receive an accommodation request like that before.
Right.
But make sure you intentionally talk it out, talk with your peers, figure out how you could maybe meet someone in the middle. Because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it says provide a reasonable accommodation. So you have to be fair and talk through it versus just getting overwhelmed and saying you can't accommodate.
Well, and that's so true. And last week I was speaking at an event, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and there was a woman there who was hearing impaired, and she had asked for 2 ASL translators, right? Interpreters. Thank you. And I asked, there's a lot of people who are automatically just doing the closed captions. And she's, I actually prefer the interpreter. Yeah. And so that's a good question, because you don't automatically just go put the closed captioning up there. And I did find it, and I've seen it before, but they always send 2 as well, because it does get tiring. I assume for one to be there constantly doing it. So they switch off in doing that interpretation. One of the things that you told me before was also the buffets and we talked about it a little bit, is about the reaching of it and the sides. And I showed that video. I posted the video of that little boy in school and having the cool scooter that somebody made him, and the step stool. Would there be, and Samantha just said, yes, there are time limits for the interpreters. So thanks, Samantha.
Yeah, it's usually if it's a 2-hour meeting, the interpreters need to, I think it's,
she said 45 minutes.
Yeah. So if you're going to have a meeting that's more than an hour, you need to have 2 interpreters.
Okay.
So they can have breaks.
Okay.
And when I was working at the Actors Union and we were setting up events, we would require a 2-week advance notice. So we can have time to set up but I would say for any event planner out there, go do your research now and find interpreters or agencies you can build a relationship with, so you're not panicking at the last minute if that request comes through.
And I think that just having that in your back pocket when you're doing your site visit or checking that information out, even EMTs. And I actually talk about not all EMTs are allowed to carry epinephrine. So you need to ask which ones can do that. So are there any good resources that you can share with us that the audience can utilize in planning for individuals with disabilities?
I would say different organizations do different trainings based on the accommodations people within that demographic may need.
Uh-huh.
So Little People of America, when they set up these conferences, they have to, I think, book like 3 years out for the conferences each year. And same with Disability Inn. We work directly with the hotel staff to make sure and almost go through some etiquette training of
Right.
try going through the buffet on your knees, because this is what the experience is going to be like. And I don't promote simulation as much because we don't want someone to spend time in a wheelchair and then be more sympathetic towards the disability community. And it's not an authentic way of saying I had my whole life experiencing this versus
Right.
a day exercise. But if it's going to help you get a little closer in order to deliver the accommodations that community of people may need, I
Right.
think it's worth giving it a try. So if you were on your knees, how would that experience be? And could you feel comfortable getting the food you need? Or could there be an option where someone could have a plated meal that includes the items in the buffet if it's a one-off experience?
And the perception that you just described, I think it's great because event professionals, event designers think about the sight lines, right? When you're sitting at a table, I'm like, are your centerpieces too tall that you can't see the screen? And so it's just a different sight line to think about.
Right.
And I think that's, and again, not that you want to promote excessive sympathy for you. It's, hey, let's check out, how is this person going to see this from, because you do it from different seating around the room, right? Why would that not be a different option to look at or perspective to look at?
Exactly.
We really just want to being able to have somebody there to assist. And actually, it's also good to ask on your registration form, are you bringing a personal assistant with you to an event? And so can you talk a little bit about that and what individuals need to accommodate for that other person, for that assistant?
Personal assistant, or even someone who is the sign language interpreter that a person may have. A high level executive at a company may have someone who travels with them already, but
Right.
you don't want to assume that. But I would say accommodate for them as a guest participating. Ideally, you're able to cover the expenses of both people because it is a reasonable accommodation. Someone needs to have that person to assist them. But even etiquette, when you're at the table with these people, you want to make sure you're talking to the person who may be deaf or hard of hearing versus their interpreter. I'm not saying you need to ignore them completely if they're taking a break and want to talk to you, but it's important to really focus on the person who's there for the event. And the assistant knows that they're there working and not necessarily included in all of the conversations. But even when it comes to a personal assistant, it's really just assessing what they may need them for. And if that is all that the event includes and they need them for every step of the way, I would say treat them as an additional guest, and it'll allow for someone to have a more pleasant experience and prevent potential bad reviews.
Yeah, because you want good reviews across the board,
Exactly.
no matter who your attendee is. And so just thinking from the perspective of a little person, what other accommodations food wise? We've talked about step stools. We've talked about the reach and the height of buffets and having a plated meal. Is there anything else that we could possibly think of that we should consider? And I might just be throwing it out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Don't rack your brain too hard.
I think it's having those multiple touch points. So for any part of your event, allow someone to ask for an accommodation. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. Most accommodations, even in the workplace, cost less than $500. It's going to be beneficial for everyone. It's something you'll have for future events. And really try to figure out how having that person at your event can make it a better event, and how people at their table can learn a lot from them and hopefully bring something home about that experience. So then the next time they're with someone with that lived experience, they're a little more understanding and inclusive.
Okay, so while you were saying that, and I remembered that it was 2 years ago, I tore my rotator cuff. And so I had, afterwards, I still had to travel with my arm in a sling, besides the 6 weeks that my mother had to cut my food for me. But I then it opened my eyes in traveling with a disability, a temporary disability with that, is like I did the lower countertop hotel check-in desk, right? They did, that specific hotel did have one, because I can't, and it was the arm I write with. So it was nice to have it lower. But what about hotel rooms? Are there things that we need to provide for you, or should we assume that you're going to make those calls on your own to the hotel?
I would say for me specifically, I need backup. Okay. I have often showed up at events where I request from the hotel to have a step stool, because I prefer not to have an ADA accessible hotel room because things tend to be higher because of the wheelchairs. I prefer a standard hotel room and a step stool that I can use to access the bathroom sink and the bed. And sometimes there may be a sliding door that goes out to a balcony and the lock may be up really high, and I won't be able to use that unless I have that accommodation. So oftentimes I'll show up at a hotel, even though I call in advance and ask for that accommodations, especially now that a lot of reservation systems are centralized and they don't even let you talk to the front desk of the exact hotel. And they try to say, we don't have that accommodation when I show up. And then I have to get other people involved to help me get the accommodation I need, because I know that there's a step stool somewhere in the building. I'm sure towels in the basement where housekeeping goes to access the multiple sources of things they may need for the hotel rooms when they replenish them after a person's stay. There has got to be something that people can't reach, even average height people. So most times they come up with a stool, but it's 12 hours later and it's almost after a full night's sleep, and maybe I'm staying there another few nights. But I'd like to have that accommodation right when I show up. And having an event team allows us to be able to execute that a little more. Or maybe the event team can just bring a step stool that they have on hand in case it happens.
That's a really good point. And thinking there's all different kinds of events. And if it's an incentive trip, that meeting planner is probably doing a lot more of that planning for you, in advance. And so that's really important for them to take that into consideration. And especially if you're going into a foreign country, what are those other things that we need to make sure that we've got covered?
Yeah, I went to one hotel and they didn't have a step stool at first, but a few hours later, because I went out to a dinner and came back, they had a step stool and they had a note, "Thank you for your patience," while we went out to purchase one. So you can be honest. You can put out your shame sleeve of, we didn't know, there was a miscommunication. I appreciate people doing that. The reality is a hotel room may be a few $100s. A step stool is $10 to $15, depending on where you find it. If you could just save yourself by going out and getting one between the time I make the reservation and the time I show up at the hotel, it's going to be a more pleasant experience for all of us.
Exactly. That's awesome. Because it's, in general, we all want to be able to just participate equally without having to ask for, or at that last minute, oh, by the way, I'm gluten-free, or by the way, hey, I need a step stool, and vice versa. Just having that accommodation pre-planned makes it so much easier.
And if the meeting planner isn't in the geographic area on a regular basis where the event is, find someone locally who'll be helping you on the ground and see if they can go and make that errand.
Right. Yeah. And pointing you in the direction of someone who will be there for you during the event in case you need it, having that contact. And especially with nowadays with phones and having the text message and having even a face-to-face and saying, "Hey, Becky, this is Tracy. Tracy's going to help you with your meals. This is your phone number." Yeah.
A lot of people have an ADA coordinator and just someone who can be available if someone has any trouble or if they're not getting the accommodation they need. I would say in the common area bathroom that we use the most too, it's helpful having a step stool there to be able to wash the hands.
And I recently noticed, like, they put the seat covers like on top of the toilet up way high. I'm like, some people, you can't reach those,
Right.
and we all want to use them, or at least I do. But okay, how can people get a hold of you? How can they find you? What's the best way to?
Well, through Disability In, if you go to the disabilityin.org website, you can see the link to our team, and you can find me there. And then I'm on all of social media under Becky Motivates.
Okay, I'm going to put these in the chat real quick. And so one thing that I love to ask everybody, and because it's the day before Thanksgiving, let's focus it on Thanksgiving food. But what is your favorite food and drink for Thanksgiving?
I love mashed potatoes, even though I could have them any time of year. And
with garlic or just regular old plain mashed potatoes?
Garlic wouldn't be bad. Just have smelly breath after. And then I would say, what the drink? And now being a mom, it's a little harder to get excited about. But Prosecco is always nice to have for celebrating.
Very good. Thank you so much for taking the time the day before Thanksgiving. I hope your mom's helping you do a lot of the cooking and stuff.
Everyone's cooking around us. We'll be taken care of.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much for spending the time and giving a new perspective on eating at a meeting, because I love we need to look at all different perspectives. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. Samantha Evans, you're a doll, for being here live with us today. And so every Wednesday we're here live, 12 o'clock Eastern on Facebook, the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group, and LinkedIn, depending on where you're watching us. And so thank you for listening. And let's see, I've got 3 episodes in December coming up. And then I'm going to take the last 2 weeks off for the year just to recoup. And we're going to kick off January with Veganary as well as Dry January. So talking about how we can serve mocktails and dry drinks at our events. So until next time, everybody, stay safe, and I appreciate you being here. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.